Have you ever noticed how some issues just seem to hit the heart of so many big things all at once?
Yeah.
I'm talking about things like property rights,
Uh-huh.
religious freedom, how a country actually governs itself. And
hmm
that's exactly the feeling I get with this whole thing going on in India right now with the Waqf Amendment Bill.
2025.
2025.
Yeah,
There's all this back and forth about who controls what and why it even matters.
absolute.
And honestly, if you're anything like me, you've seen the headlines and thought, okay, this seems important, but where do I even begin to wrap my head around it? And that's exactly what we're here to do today. Take a deep dive, a good hard look at what's going on.
Yeah, I think it's important for people to know that this isn't just some like minor tweak they're making.
Right.
This is something that could really reshape how a huge amount of land and the institutions connected to it are actually run.
Yeah.
We're talking about Waqf properties, these religious or charitable endowments
Yeah.
made by Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
And the scale of it is almost hard to even
It's
imagine.
massive.
It's close to 870,000 separate properties spread over like 940,000 acres.
Wow.
I mean, think about it. That's like twice the size of Mauritius.
Twice the size of Mauritius. Okay, that's a visual I can actually grasp. That's incredible.
It is all dedicated to religious and charitable work.
And it's not just empty land, right? I mean, we're talking about mosques, places that have been at the center of communities for generations.
Yeah.
Graveyards that hold the history of families, schools, places where children are being educated.
Right.
And even in some cases, entire villages that have historically been under this Waqf designation.
Exactly.
It makes sense that trying to manage something that huge, that far-reaching, would come with its own, unique set of challenges.
Absolutely.
And, the idea behind Waqf, the spirit of it, this beautiful idea of a permanent offering to God.
Right.
But then you get into the practicalities.
Yeah.
Human beings actually having to administer it all. It's bound to get complicated. And, you can imagine there are going to be challenges keeping things transparent.
Yeah.
Making sure things are done efficiently. And even, sadly, the potential for corruption to creep in.
Right, because you have this tension between something that is supposed to be, sacred and perpetual with this human, sometimes flawed, system of governance.
Yeah.
And so that's really where this Waqf Amendment Bill comes in. The government's
Yeah.
trying to address some of these longstanding issues.
Make sense of it all.
Yeah. And so what we really want to do in this deep dive is try to break down what exactly is in this bill
Right.
and what are the different perspectives surrounding it,
Yeah.
and hopefully give you a much clearer understanding of what's really at stake.
Without getting too bogged down in all the legal jargon.
Exactly. You don't need to be a lawyer.
Right, exactly. Consider us your legal jargon filter.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's take a step back. This bill, this didn't just appear out of thin air, did it?
Right.
This has gone through a pretty significant journey in the Indian parliament, hasn't it?
Yeah, so we're going to have to rewind a little bit. Go
Right.
back to August 2024, when this was first introduced in the Lok Sabha.
The Lok Sabha being the lower house of parliament.
Right.
Yeah.
And right away, right from the beginning,
Yeah.
this thing met a lot of pushback, a lot of concerns from different political parties.
Right.
And because of all that, they decided to refer it to a joint parliamentary committee,
A JPC.
a JPC.
I've heard that term a lot.
Yeah. And essentially, it's a group of people from both the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha.
Okay.
So both houses representing different parties.
Right.
And they're supposed to give the bill a much more thorough look.
Hopefully find some common ground.
Exactly.
And so this JPC spent months looking at this bill, right? Finally giving their report earlier this year,
Yeah.
February 2025.
February 13th, they submitted their report.
Okay.
And then things moved pretty quickly after that.
Yeah, I was going to say February 13th and then just 6 days later.
6 days later, the Union Cabinet gave their approval.
On February 19th.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that basically clears the way for the debates and the votes in both houses.
And those were not quiet affairs.
No.
The news was full of reports about really intense debates, some pretty close votes.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that
Yeah.
because this was debated heavily in both the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha,
At the upper house.
the upper house. Yeah.
Right.
And when it finally came down to the votes, you could really see the division.
Uh-huh.
So in the Lok Sabha, 288 in favor, 232 against.
Okay.
Rajya Sabha, it was 128 to 95.
Okay. So closer in the lower house, but still. I mean, these were not, landslide victories.
Not at all. And I think The fact that so many elected officials were against it, that really shows you just how controversial these changes are.
It tells you right away that there are some really fundamental disagreements
Yeah.
about what this bill actually means, what it's really all about, what the effects are going to be. And so before we jump into the specifics, all the ins and outs of what's actually being proposed,
Yeah.
I think it's important that we make sure we all really understand what we're even talking about when we say the word Waqf, right?
For sure. Yeah.
I thought I had a general idea, but, after hearing about the sheer scale of
The
this,
scope of it.
yeah, it really hit home that we need to get the basics down.
Right.
So what is a Waqf?
So imagine this. You have a devout Muslim.
Okay.
They've inherited some property.
Okay.
Could be a big piece of land, something that's been in their family for, generations.
Right.
And guided by their faith, they decide, you know what? I want to dedicate this property to God
Right.
for religious reasons.
Or charitable purposes.
Exactly.
Okay.
So maybe it's to help support a mosque. Maybe it's to create a school, a place where kids can get an education who might not otherwise have one.
Provide for the needy.
Yeah, exactly. Food, assistance, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And once they make this dedication, this act of waqf,
It's permanent.
it's basically permanent. They don't own that property anymore in the traditional sense.
It's not part of their personal estate.
Right. It becomes this endowment that's held forever.
Right.
And it's meant to serve that specific purpose,
Right.
the religious or charitable cause that it was set up for.
So it's almost like, if I can make a comparison,
Yeah.
it's like setting up a trust fund, but specifically designed to help the Muslim community achieve religious or charitable goals.
Exactly.
And it's meant to last forever.
Right. And like we talked about, the total amount of land and property in India that falls under this Waqf status,
Huge.
all massive.
Almost 1 million acres.
Yeah.
It's a really diverse mix of things, too, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not just places of worship. It can be burial grounds,
Right.
schools, community centers,
Yeah.
and as you said, in some cases, even entire villages.
Going back centuries.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay. So all of this is managed at a state level by 32 different Waqf boards.
That's right.
And then there's a central body, the Central Waqf Council,
CWC.
CWC, that advises the government on all matters related to these properties.
Nationwide.
So it's really deeply rooted. It's really woven into the fabric of the country in a way that most people probably don't even realize. So given how big this is, how complex it is just to manage, so many assets,
Yeah.
what exactly is the government saying is the core issue? What's the problem that they're trying to solve with this bill? Why are these amendments being proposed?
Well, the government's stance, the way they laid it out in that Ministry of Minority Affairs press release back in April,
Right.
is that this bill is all about reform.
Okay.
They're saying the system needs to be fixed. And they've actually pointed out what they call 10 big problems
10 big problems.
that are affecting the Waqf system.
Give me some examples.
Well, one of the things they talk about is a lack of transparency. How are these Waqf properties being managed?
Right. Who's really watching the shop?
Exactly. And then another thing is that a lot of the land surveys are either incomplete or out of date.
Which could lead to all sorts of disputes over ownership, boundaries, who's entitled to what.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's also the issue of women's inheritance rights. They're saying in some cases those haven't been properly recognized.
Not implemented fairly.
Yeah.
Okay, all of those sound like valid points. I mean, any organization that's managing public trusts needs to be transparent,
Yeah.
needs to be accountable.
Right.
And, addressing gender disparities, well, that's crucial everywhere.
Across the board.
Across the board, absolutely. But I'm curious, did the government give any specific examples to illustrate these problems?
Yeah, they did. And they highlighted this one case. It involves a farmer
Okay.
in a village called Thirukantharai in Tamil Nadu. Yeah. And apparently, according to what the government's saying, this farmer wanted to sell a piece of his land.
Ancestral lands.
Ancestral land, yeah.
Okay.
To help pay for his daughter's wedding.
Ah, okay.
But the local Waqf board stepped in and said, nope, you can't do that.
Why?
Because they're claiming the entire village.
Including a 1,500-year-old Hindu temple
Including that temple, yeah.
is registered as Waqf property.
His Waqf property.
So basically, this farmer was told he couldn't sell his land because the Waqf board was saying it wasn't actually his to sell.
Pretty much, yeah.
Wow. That's a pretty dramatic story, if it's accurate. And the government's using this to say that Waqf boards have too much power.
Yeah, they're calling it irrational power.
Irrational power. Okay,
Yeah.
so they're saying Waqf boards are making claims to property that they might not be entitled to.
Yeah, that's their argument.
Okay, so what are the key changes that this Waqf Amendment Bill 2025 is proposing to address all this?
Okay.
I know there are a lot of amendments, over 40, I think.
I believe we're 40, yeah.
So let's focus on the big ones, the ones that are going to have the most impact.
Okay, so one of the most significant changes is about who actually gets to be on the Waqf boards.
Okay, so we're talking about the composition of the boards themselves.
Yeah, the makeup of the boards.
Yeah.
So before, it was all Muslims.
Yeah.
But this new bill,
It's proposing to add non-Muslims.
yeah, up to 2 non-Muslim members.
On each state Waqf board.
Yeah, and on the Central Waqf Council, too.
And the CWC.
And even the Waqf tribunals.
So these are bodies that are traditionally made up entirely of Muslims, and now they're saying, let's include some non-Muslims.
All right.
What's the rationale behind that?
The government's argument is that this will bring in a wider range of viewpoints,
Oh, okay.
more perspectives, and they think that could lead to more transparency and make things a bit more impartial.
Okay, so more balanced decision-making, potentially.
Potentially, yeah.
Okay. What about the WAC tribunals? You mentioned those.
Yeah, they're getting a bit of an overhaul, too.
Because their role is specifically to resolve disputes, right?
Exactly. So under the old system, the tribunals basically had the final word.
Whatever they decided, that was it. Case closed.
Yeah, but with this new bill,
They're losing some of that power.
their decisions can now be appealed to the high courts.
Okay. So bringing them under the regular court system.
Exactly. More oversight.
Mm-hmm.
And another big change is they used to require a Muslim law expert to be on a tribunal.
Right, because we're dealing with matters that are very specific to Islamic law and tradition.
Right. But they're doing away with that requirement.
So they're saying you don't need to have a scholar of Islamic law
Yeah, not anymore.
to be making these decisions. Okay, so that's a significant shift. I remember reading something about government land, too.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
What are they changing there?
They're giving a lot more power to the district collector.
Which is a government official, right?
Right, kind of like a local administrator.
Okay.
So if there's a dispute over who owns some land,
A dispute between, say, a WAF board
and the government,
and the government. Okay.
the district collector now gets to decide.
Wow. That's a lot of power in the hands of a government official.
It is.
To basically adjudicate a dispute between, a religious body and the state. That seems like it could lead to some concerns about bias.
You can definitely see how people might worry about that.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Okay, and then you mentioned earlier that the idea of whack by user is going away.
Yeah, and this is probably one of the biggest changes and definitely one of the most controversial.
Explain that one for me, because I'm not sure I fully understand what whack by user even means.
Okay, so before, if a property had been used by the Muslim community
For religious purpose.
for religious purposes, for charity,
Okay.
for a long time, it could actually be considered a whack for property even if they didn't have a formal declaration.
Even if they didn't have the papers to prove it.
Right, just based on how it had been used.
Oh.
But they're scrapping that. Now they're saying you need to have a proper legal declaration,
A paper trail.
a paper trail, basically,
Okay.
if you want a property to be recognized as whack.
So the government's saying this will make things clearer.
That's their argument.
Prevent false claims.
Yeah, cut down on any kind of shady stuff.
Okay.
But the problem is there are a lot of properties.
That fall under this whack by user category.
A lot.
Sure.
Estimates are around 402,000.
402,000 properties that could suddenly be in limbo
Yeah.
because they might not have the paperwork.
Exactly.
So basically what the government is saying with this bill is, look, we need more transparency. We need to digitize all these records to stop fraud. We need to reduce corruption. And we need to make sure women are being treated fairly.
Yeah, those are the main points they're pushing.
And all of those are good things in principle.
Of course.
Right. But the way they're going about it,
Yeah.
it really seems like it's concentrating a lot of power in the hands of the government.
Exactly. The government ends up with a lot more control.
And that's obviously raising some major red flags
Yeah.
with the Muslim community and opposition parties. What are they saying about all this?
Well, there's a lot of anger
I can imagine.
and a lot of fear. I mean, the general feeling is that this bill is a direct attack on minority rights.
They feel like they're being targeted.
Yeah, absolutely. And they say it goes against the Indian Constitution.
Okay, how so?
Well, the Constitution guarantees religious groups the right to manage their own affairs.
Right.
And they're saying this bill is trying to take that away.
Basically saying the government is interfering where it shouldn't be.
Yeah, they're saying this is our religion. These are our properties. You can't just come in and tell us how to run things.
And the fact that there were over 40 proposed amendments
from opposition MPs.
during the JPC discussions.
Yeah,
And none of them were accepted.
none of them,
That speaks volumes.
doesn't it?
It really does. It says a lot about how willing the government was to consider different points of view.
Right, and there have even been some allegations that dissent notes, the opinions from opposition members,
Were not included in the final report.
yeah, like they were censored.
Wow. And we've also seen some pretty strong statements from opposition leaders, haven't we?
Oh, yeah.
I remember Gaurav Gogoi, the Congress MP, he said something like, this bill is just a way to grab Muslim land.
Yeah, he was not holding back.
Not at all. And then there was that really dramatic protest by Asaduddin Owaisi in Parliament.
From Imam,
Yeah. He actually tore up a copy of the bill.
yeah, he called it a mockery of democracy.
Wow.
Yeah.
So clearly a lot of very strong emotions.
Yeah. And then you have the All India Muslim Personal Law Board. They're saying they're going to go to the Supreme Court
To challenge the law.
to challenge the law. They're really worried about this whole walk by user thing being scrapped.
Because they're saying that could affect hundreds of thousands of properties.
Exactly. They're saying it's going to create chaos.
So this really boils down to a fear of government overreach.
Yeah. I mean, the Muslim community is feeling like the government's trying to take control of their religious institutions.
And it's not just about putting non-Muslims on the boards. It's about giving so much power to government officials like that district collector.
Right.
I mean, these are really sensitive matters, deciding who owns what when it comes to religious property.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's no wonder people are worried about whether these officials will be impartial.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that this isn't happening in a vacuum.
Right.
The Muslim community is already feeling like they've been targeted by other laws.
Like the triple talaq ban.
Exactly. And then there were the discussions about a uniform civil code.
Which, to oversimplify it, would mean having one set of laws governing personal matters.
For everyone.
For everyone.
Regardless of their religion.
Regardless of their religion. So this whole whack thing.
It's part of a bigger picture.
It's part of a bigger picture. Okay, so we've got these two very different sides to the story.
Yeah.
On one hand, you've got the government saying, look, we need reform, the system's broken, we need to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got the Muslim community saying, no, this is an attack on our rights, you're trying to take control.
Yeah.
So where do you stand on all of this?
It's complicated.
It's never simple, is it?
Never. Look, I think it's important to acknowledge that there probably are some legitimate issues.
Within the Waqf system.
Yeah. Mismanagement, corruption, those things happen.
The Satchar Committee's report from way back in 2005,
Yeah.
that actually highlighted some of these problems.
Right. They talked about how much potential WAP properties have.
If they're managed properly.
Yeah, if they're run well, they could really help improve the socioeconomic conditions for a lot of Muslims in India.
Okay, so there's at least some validity to the argument that things need to change.
I think so.
But then the question becomes, why focus so specifically on Waqf?
That's a good question. India has lots of other religious trusts, right?
Right.
Hindu temples, the Parsi panchayats, the Sikh community has the SGPC.
And they've all got different levels of government oversight.
Exactly. So why is WAC being singled out?
It does raise questions.
Yeah. Well, what's really driving this?
And then there's the whole legal side of things.
Constitutional issues.
The Constitution guarantees religious freedom.
Article 26. It says denominations have the right to manage their own affairs.
So the opposition is saying this bill violates that.
Yeah, they're saying it's unconstitutional.
But the government might argue that they're trying to uphold Article 14.
Equality before the law.
Right. Because maybe they're saying the way Waqf properties are managed now under Muslim personal law
It's not really equal.
to how other religious groups manage their properties.
Yeah, and then that ties into this whole debate about a uniform civil code.
Which is a whole other can of worms.
It is.
But it all kind of connects back to this question of who gets to decide what, what are the rules, and who makes them. Okay, but let's shift gears a bit and talk about the practical consequences.
Yeah.
What could actually happen once this bill becomes law?
Well, I think we're going to see a lot more lawsuits.
Over land ownership.
Yeah, especially with all those properties that were recognized under Waqf by user.
Because now they might not have the legal standing.
Exactly, and that could create so much uncertainty.
And it's not just about individuals, it's about communities that could be affected.
Entire communities.
And then there's also the potential for, you know, certain groups
To exploit this law.
to try and claim mosque sites, for example.
Yeah, or other religious structures.
Especially in places where there's this whole narrative about, you know, a temple having existed there before.
Right. Historical claims.
Yeah. I mean, the potential for this to really escalate tensions.
It's a big concern.
It's really worrying.
And then there's the district collector issue.
Right, because now they have all this power.
To decide these land disputes.
And who knows how they're going to use it.
Yeah, some might be fair and impartial.
But some might not.
Right. Some might be swayed by local politics.
Or even their own biases.
Exactly.
So this could really end up creating a lot more resentment.
Yeah, within the Muslim community.
And it's not just about the land itself.
It's about so much more than that.
It's about who's in control.
It's about identity, about religious freedom.
And it's about trust. Whether minority communities can trust the government to treat them fairly.
Yeah, and when that trust is broken,
it's hard to repair.
It is. And it affects everyone, not just the community that's been targeted.
It affects the whole fabric of society.
Absolutely.
Okay, so to recap, we've got the government saying reform is needed. The Waqf system needs to be cleaned up.
Right.
And we've got the Muslim community and the opposition saying, no, this is a power grab. This is an attack on our rights.
And both sides have valid points.
Yeah, there are no easy answers here.
Not at all.
So I guess the question for our listeners is, what do you think?
Yeah, what do you make of all this?
Is this bill a necessary step towards more transparency, better management?
Or is it an overreach?
Is it a way to take control away from the Muslim community?
Is it going to lead to more division?
More tension? I mean, think about the long-term consequences.
Yeah, not just for the Muslim community.
But for all of India.
For everyone.
And, you know, it's not over yet.
Yeah.
The bill's passed Parliament. It's waiting for the president's signature. And then there's a good chance it'll end up in the Supreme Court.
It probably will.
So this is a story that's still unfolding. Stay informed, stay engaged.
And form your own opinions.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, we hope this has been helpful.
Keep learning, keep thinking about these issues.
Because they matter.
They really do.